Do you believe that freehold is a better option? Some believe that freehold is a better option because it lasts forever, while some think that leasehold is a better option because there's more profits. Exactly, is freehold a better option or a leasehold better option, and which of the following makes more profits? Some also believe that freehold eventually have more profits. So which, freehold or leasehold, is a better option when you're buying today? Hello everyone, I'm Dan, and today I'll be sharing with you whether freehold or leasehold is a better option in today's market and which one should you consider if you're planning to buy a property today. Without further ado, let's get started. So these are the recent articles that you might have seen recently. One of it states that profitability gap actually shrinks between the leasehold and the freehold condos. What does it mean is that actually the profitability of leasehold and freehold condos, they are very similar, and I'll go through you in depth later on. So in this video, I'll be explaining to you about this article, followed by the burning questions that you might have, because all buyers and sellers have questions regarding to freehold and leasehold. Some of the questions actually include, if leasehold is almost as profitable as freehold condos, should I actually save money and skip buying a freehold property, or should I buy a leasehold property today? And also, in today's market, should we exactly go for a freehold instead of leasehold because the gap is around 20 to 40%? And also, is tenure very important when you're buying a property today, especially if you're an investor looking at rental income? And next, I will also be sharing with you, given to this 5 to 10 years transit, which tenure, whether a leasehold or a freehold, is a smartest choice, followed by lastly, whether the bank valuation will be affected by your lease, and what is the buyer demand in today's market in Singapore. Finally, I will actually share with you if you are a buyer or seller today holding a leasehold property or freehold property, or if you are buying into a freehold or leasehold property, which are your options. So as I shared earlier, this is an article that you might have seen. So in this article, it actually states that the leasehold condo are actually coming to as profitable as the freehold developments in today's market. And in some of the areas, the leasehold condo actually make more money than a freehold condo. And he also suggested that, especially for the leasehold development that are nearer to the MRT station and amenities like shopping malls, they actually help to determine the profitability and the prices of the property, and eventually affect you when you have the exit. So when we continue to this article, next in the article, it actually mentioned that overall, for the leasehold property, the median profit is 280,000 for a leasehold, and versus a freehold in the Katong Park area is 200,000. So what it actually means is that the leasehold property make more money than a freehold property if you were to buy exactly on the same day near the Katong Park MRT. And another example that they actually studied was also a similar trend around the Serangoon MRT station, where a leasehold property saw 240,000 profits and a freehold property saw 171,000 profits. So the profits are actually more for the leasehold instead of a freehold property. So one of the reasons why a leasehold property may have more profits than a freehold property is also stated here because of the volume transactions. So when we continue in the article, the properties that are nearer to the MRT station, they actually have a ability to command a higher price because they are more convenient for the buyers and also the consumers. That's why in the mature estates, those condos, even though they are actually leasehold, in fact, the property price grows faster than the freehold. And another well-known example is also the Treasure at Tampines, which have a record of 484 transactions of a median profit of 231,000 in the whole entire year. And also Jadescape around the Marymount MRT station area saw a profit of around 331,000 in the same year. So according to the study, the leasehold property actually made more money during the same year, even though they are leasehold as compared to a freehold. Why is it so? So here we have a graph which I will show you in the next slide. So in this picture over here, in the same article, it mentioned that however in some areas, for example like the Outram Park area or the more central areas, people do in fact prefer the freehold project. So in the freehold project in the Outram Park area, it earned 230,000 as compared to a leasehold that earned 136,000. This means that for the Outram Park freehold ones, it was earning around 230,000 versus the leasehold ones are earning around 136,000. So in the more mature estates, there are still owners that prefer the freehold development. This is also an example in the Great World City. So in the Great World City itself, the freehold properties actually have a profit of around 350,000 as compared to the leasehold of 243,000, which is more than the leasehold property. So actually the freehold or leasehold property do make a difference on the location itself, because generally in the more mature estates, there are still buyers that prefer the freehold areas. So this picture actually shows a profitability gap between the freehold condos and also the leasehold condos, and it's a study of 765 condos within a 2 km radius to 9 MRT stations. So assuming that they are also close to the MRT stations, should you buy a freehold or a leasehold, and which one actually makes more money? So from 2017 to 2024 last year, in fact, in the beginning of 2017, the freehold property and the leasehold property have a big difference in terms of the profits. However, fast forward to today, the gap in the profits are really small. The average of the profit for a freehold property is around 340,000 versus a leasehold property, the profit is around 310,000 on average for 765 condos itself. So if the profitability gap is so small between the freehold and leasehold, which one should you consider to buy in today's market, and especially if you're buying for a long run, for investment or for you to stay inside? The article continues to explain why is the profitability gap continue to shrink in this area between the freehold and leasehold. He actually explained that now the trend have reversed. So in the past, the gap between the freehold and leasehold used to be around 20.7% for the gap, and right now in 2024, the gap is around 3.7%. So you do see a difference between a freehold and a leasehold right now because the gap in profitability is getting smaller. So here in this article, it says it's currently 3.7% in terms of the profitability. So should we still buy a freehold if we want to earn same amount of profit? In fact, the trend has started to change in the recent year, and one of the reasons why is because more home buyers are actually prioritizing convenience and accessibility to the amenities, and that's why some of them are willing to give out the freehold trend and also having a leasehold property instead of a freehold property right now. And that's why across these years from 2017 to 2024, we do see the gap between these two shrinking in terms of the profitability. However, are there any areas whereby freehold is actually more preferred? Yes, there is. In fact, in areas where there are high net worth individuals, they usually prefer freehold properties, especially in the prime areas like District 9, 10, 11. Here also stated that in District 10, the high net worth individuals, they do prefer a freehold as compared to leasehold in terms of their property choices. However, in contrast, for the mass market OCR outside of central area region, usually the buyers like Singaporeans and PR, we do prefer affordability, and hence we might prefer a shorter horizon time period and also focusing on the leasehold as compared to freehold, and that's why the trend have been reversing in the recent years. Another reasons why the high net worths in the District 10 might prefer a freehold is because they prefer legacy planning, and hence they will hold a freehold to pass on the property to their next generations. As compared to us, like Singaporeans and PR, we might be looking at a shorter time frame, and that's why lesser of us will actually prioritize the freehold tenure when we are making decisions about our homestay. And because of this, there's also lesser resale activities for the freehold, and that's why with lesser volumes and transaction, it could be a reason why the profitability for the freehold is actually decreasing over these years. However, this does not mean that the freehold is actually less value of today, because if you see in the article, freehold may hold their price better in the long run because there will be no lease decay. And also, meanwhile in Singapore, the government is actually releasing more leasehold lands, and hence lands that are actually freehold are very limited in supply, and this is one reason why freehold value might still sustain in the long run. The article also states here that if you're a buyer looking for leasehold, you need to be careful because for leasehold, the value of the lease shortens over time, and this might affect your ability to secure a full loan, or eventually when you want to exit in the future, your buyer will find it challenging if the lease is too short. What this actually means is that if you're considering a leasehold that have a shorter lease, you might want to consider another option, because the shorter your lease is, there is a risk of you being unable to secure a full loan, or in the future, it will be more challenging for you to exit. However, if today you're holding a property with a shorter leasehold tenure, you want to consider if you want to swap to a property with a newer lease, because eventually it will be more and more challenging as the years goes by. So this is a summary of the article about the profitability shrinking between the freehold property and also the leasehold property. Right now, I'll skip to the burning questions that you might have at the moment. So these are some burning questions that I thought for my video. If you have any other burning questions, feel free to contact me over here with my contact number, or you can actually drop me a DM for my social media. So some of the questions that I'll be going through here. So first question, if the leasehold is not as profitable, should I actually save money and skip freehold properties today? So if today you're an investor looking at leasehold property, yes, leasehold property can be almost as profitable as a freehold property, and also is more value for money, especially if you are looking at rental yield or short-term capital appreciation, because your capital appreciation is almost the same between the leasehold and also the freehold. So if you are looking at a place whereby you can afford easier, leasehold might be one of your options, especially if you are looking for own stay or for investment. So this is because leasehold is actually at a lower cost, so when you are selling in the future, likelihood your return on investment, the ROI will be better for the leasehold property instead of a freehold property. However, if today you say that I only want freehold property, the price gap can be very huge. So for example, in today's market, if you are looking for a freehold property like the Continuum in the District 15, the 3-bedroom for the Continuum of 1076 square feet is around $3 million to $3.5 million. However, if you are going for a leasehold property in the same area of District 15, there is Grand Diamond, and Grand Diamond for a 4-bedroom is around $3.5 million. If you are looking at a 3-bedroom, you can potentially save around $1 million and get it at $2.5 million instead. So for a freehold 3-bedroom, to summarize, is around $3.5 million, but a leasehold 4-bedroom is also the same price at $3.5 million. If you have a family today, which one will be more better for you if you are staying it with your kids or like your family? Versus if you are buying a leasehold 3-bedroom, is around $2.5 million. So with this price, you can see the price gap between a freehold and a leasehold. Generally, your choice should actually depend on what's your long-term plan. Do you prefer to leave it for legacy, or are you looking for short-term appreciation, and what is your budget at the point of time? Okay, so for the next question, what kind of buyer should still go for freehold in today's market? So generally in today's market, a freehold is around 10 to 15% higher as compared to the leasehold property. And for the buyers that are looking at a freehold market are those that prefer to plan for legacy. They have kids and are planning to pass the property to the next generation, or they prefer to have a peace of mind and not worry about the lease decay because they are also planning to hold it for a long term. Generally, these owners have around 10 to 20 years horizon, then you get a freehold property. But if you are looking for less than 10 to 20 years, you can actually consider a 99 years. So in summary, actually the leasehold property is more efficient and effective. It's also a more practical and cost-saving method if you are going for a property today. If you are focusing on the legacy, then you go for freehold property. So the third question here is tenure still important when you're buying a property for rental income? In fact, for rental income today, tenure is not very important because from the tenant's point of view, whether is it a freehold or leasehold, they're only staying for 1 to 2 years, and most importantly to them is actually the rental that you're going to pay. So for the tenant's tenure, whether is it freehold or leasehold does not matter to them, and they cannot differentiate. As long as your property is in the right location, closer to the amenities, they will actually consider the property for their staying. So if you are buying for investment, then I would suggest you to go for a leasehold, because for a leasehold, the investment is actually more cheaper in terms of the quantum, and it's more easier for you to have a higher ROI and return on investment. Also, with a better yield today, it's more likely for you to exit in the future, and you have more pool of buyers when you're actually wanting to exit, because you can look for the investors or you can look for those buying for own stay when you're exiting. So to answer this question, no, tenure is not important when you're looking at the rental income itself. So the fourth question is, if I plan to sell my property in the next 5 to 10 years horizon, which tenure is a smarter choice? In this case, a smarter choice will be a leasehold property, and why? Because for leasehold property, it's actually easier for you to enter at a lower price and ride through the growth of the property price appreciation. And also for freehold, usually you only see the effect of freehold around 10 to 15 years later. So for the short 5 to 10 years, you do not see the freehold rising their price so fast. So if you're planning to sell between 5 to 10 years, you should definitely go for a leasehold property. Moreover, if you are choosing a leasehold between a freehold, usually the freehold property will be much older and the amenities are also older. But if you go for a leasehold property, the amenities will be newer, and as an owner or tenant, I might prefer a newer facilities and amenities in the condo development as compared to a freehold that the facilities are actually outdated and damaged. So if you are looking to sell in the next 5 to 10 years, as for investment, a smarter choice will be the leasehold property. So for the last question over here, does tenure actually affect the bank valuation and also the buyer's demand? Generally, the bank do not value the freehold and also the leasehold property differently, as long as you have a healthy amount of lease left. So if your lease is around 35 to 45 years left from whatever you're holding right now, your tenure is starting to decrease and the bank will be able to lend the next buyer lesser loan afterwards. That's when the bank valuation will start to drop, or the loan ability for the next buyer will start to drop, and that's when you might see the price of the property start to drop. And also for Singaporeans and also the PR buyers today, generally we are buying for a homestay and we are more emotional in terms of what we are buying today. So we might prefer newer lease. So if you are asking me whether you should go for a freehold or leasehold, depending on what you are choosing today, if you are buying for a short term again, it will not affect for the tenure, because only when you have 35 years to 45 years left, that's when your tenure and your bank valuation will be affected, when your price start to have a different drop or increment drastically. So after answering all these questions about the freehold and leasehold, which one is better, I will next go through with you the 5 golden principles of property investment today, followed by what should you do today as a buyer and seller looking at a property to purchase today. So these are the 5 golden principles that I will advocate for all my clients. Number 1 is to start saving and investing as early as you can. Number 2 is to always aim to increase your net asset worth value. And number 3, invest based on numbers, not emotions. So we can use like the past history data to actually see how the property price may continue to grow or remain stable in the future. Number 4, buy for future instead of present. When you're buying for the future, you need to understand what are the land plots around the property that you're buying. Is there any future potential? And if there's any future potential, does that mean that you can exit at a better price and it'll be easier for you to exit in the future? And last but not least, have 18 months of emergency saving, because we do not know how the economy will turn out and we need to prepare for the worst case scenario. If you are going to be unemployed or if something happened to you or your family, you have enough money to sustain the property. So these are the 5 golden investment property rules that I will actually advocate to all my clients, and you can actually screenshot and make sure that you follow these rules for all your property investments. So if today you're a buyer or seller, this is what you should do. For buyers, you should not focus just on the tenure. So you can actually consider both the leasehold and the freehold depending on your budget, and you need to understand about the value and capital appreciation. How long are you going to purchase this property for? So usually for leasehold, it offers better location, newer facilities, and you might have stronger rental yield over the time because you enter at a lower price. Whereas for freehold, if you are planning for legacy, holding it for a very long term, or you think that the land that you are buying into have potential for en bloc, then you can go for freehold. So consider when is your exit point, how long are you going to hold this property for before you actually buy your property. Next, for sellers, if you're actually holding a property today, take a look at your tenure of your current property, count how much is the lease left for your property and whether is it aging. As mentioned earlier, aging is around 35 years to 45 years left in the lease, and the lower your lease is, it also means that you might take longer time to sell because the loan ability for your next buyer will start to drop, and this means that they need to pay out more cash up front if they want to buy your property. So if your property is starting to age or you stay inside for more than 5 years, it's time you relook at what are the different exit opportunities and whether your property will continue to have price growth. So you should actually look at your own property current runway. What is the current valuation? Are you actually sitting on a paper profit? And how can you actually change your asset that is going to help you perform even better and can make use of the current cash and make the money work harder for you? So these are what you need to do for the buyers and sellers. So today I've gone through with you. In fact, in today's market, the profitability gap is actually shrinking between the freehold property and also the leasehold property. If both of them, whether you are buying at a higher quantum or low quantum, you're actually earning the same amount of profit, should you relook at what you're actually buying to today's market? And also I've gone through with you the different questions, whether you should go for a freehold property or a leasehold property today, and these are your actions as buyer and seller. If you still have more questions about property, feel free to drop me a text at 94314533 and I will be be happy to share with you more. Remember to like, share and subscribe for my channel, and I'll be sharing with you more about the different articles and my analysis over the next few weeks. Thank you so much and bye bye.